Hello, everybody. I'm Carla Meske, and I'm with SpiritHealer.com. And you have joined one of our pop-up circles. And a pop-up circle is a quickly pulled together gathering around a special interest. And in this case, it's the talk of the globe, coronavirus, COVID-19. And we have a special guest tonight, Lawrence Birch from Corvallis, Oregon, and Southern California. And he's going to be sharing information about COVID-19 with us, although we're all like swamped with it now. But mostly important, he'll be sharing information about herbal protection and remedy for it. And I would like to introduce you to Lawrence Birch. Lawrence, will you say hello, please?
Hi, everybody. How is everybody doing today?
We have quite a few people on the call. It's a lovely, lovely thing. Lawrence, you might want to give a few words of introduction and then share with us the wisdom you have about coronavirus, please.
All right. Well, first thing I should say is I've got a little virus myself. Probably not the coronavirus, but I have been a little bit under the weather for about 10 days now. I'm finally on the mend. It's a little odd when you're an herbalist to admit that you've got an illness because we're all supposed to be perfectly healthy all the time, but I'm human like everybody else. So if I cough or if I reach for a lozenge, it's because I'm trying to preserve my voice and make sure that things are going well. In a nutshell, I've been an herbalist since I was 18. And I'm a pretty old guy now, so you can imagine how long I've been working with plants. I started wildcrafting. Basically, that means I go out and gather my own medicines in 1991 when I began a 2-year apprenticeship with a local herbalist named Howie Brownstein. I started my own company called Giving Tree Farm Herb Company in 1993. First product I made was herbal smoky mixtures, and I sold it at a Grateful Dead concert. So the Grateful Dead helped pay my rent and started my business. Since then, I've also studied shamanism. I've been a shamanic practitioner since 1998, and I've been a clinical herbalist since the year 2000. I have a bachelor's degree in painting, one of those degrees that you get when you want to really go out in the world and make a lot of money. And I also have taught anatomy and physiology at Lane Community College down in Eugene for 8 years, from 2005 to 2013. So currently, I run my business, Giving Tree Farm, with herbal consultations that I do one-on-one, and I make herbal products for my clients. And I also teach classes for the community, and as well as in Orange County, where I divide my time, Orange County, California, where I also give psychic readings, tarot readings, and I'm also a shamanic healer down there as well. So, okay. So let's talk about herbs, right? There's a few different ways to think about herbs when it comes to infectious type illnesses. And we're going to talk about kind of different classes of herbs. I'm going to try to keep it fairly simple and then also give you some example of herbs that you could access that are going to help you maintain your health. So really, herbs are kind of like concentrated medicines. They're also like concentrated nutrition in a green package, you could say. What my teacher used to say was, it's great when somebody can just throw a little green noise into their system, meaning anything is going to be of benefit if you match the person to the herb correctly, right? So many herbs, the ones that you can use on a regular basis, daily for longer, medium, or even short periods of time, most of those herbs are very nutritive in their aspect, meaning that primarily how they're helping you is providing you with something that your body really needs, some kind of, maybe it's a vitamin or a mineral or enzyme or some other aspect that our bodies probably recognize because we've grown up with herbs for our entire existence. And when we get into our system, it just makes us feel better. We call those herbs tonic herbs, and they often act as preventatives when we take them regularly, because they're providing an extra boost of nutrition in some way that we probably won't get anywhere else, even from really nice vegetables. Those herbs are very special that way. Another kind of classification for herbs that we like to talk about are adaptogens. And you may have heard this, especially in relationship to something like ginseng, which is one of the premier adaptogens. Basically, the way to think about adaptogens, just very briefly, is that they help us adapt. And what do they help us adapt to? Stress. Okay. So there's two kinds of stress, really. There's what's called distress or bad stress. And then there's actually good stress, believe it or not, called eustress. Really, all you have to think is that, if you like going on roller coasters and that kind of stresses you out, but it's also exciting, that's a good example of good stress, right? If you're somebody that is terrified and you just got stuck on a roller coaster because, I don't know, somebody made you do it, then that's probably an example of distress or bad stress for you. Now, if you were able to take a look at both of those people and just kind of measure what was going on in their system during that stressful, either good or bad, ride on the amusement park, you'd find that the person who was under good stress would be similar in terms of what kinds of chemicals their body was reacting to. Simple term for those is stress hormones. But at the end of the ride, they would come back to whatever their normal is much more quickly. Whereas it might be the case that the person who was really stressed out and hated going on the roller coaster originally, but did it just to be, part of the team, might end up with those stress chemicals in their system for a much longer period of time, because their anxiety was level got raised, and it wasn't really fun, and all these other things that contribute to them not having a good time. Now, you should also realize that I'm talking about stress and hormones. That must mean I'm talking about the endocrine system, okay? There's a relationship between the endocrine system, our nervous system, and our immune system. Those all three come together in a very important way to regulate many of the systems, all of the systems really in our body, and also are talking with each other constantly to help keep us in balance. So the idea with adaptogens then is there's a little talking that comes in from these herbs, in a sense, you could say, and that they're going to help our body buffer the stress, cut off the sharp ends of the stress, you could say, or allow us to maybe get stressed, but then come back to our center, whatever that might be, homeostasis, much more easily, much more readily, and stay there, because that's when we're going to be at our most healthy, productive, and balanced. Hopefully that makes sense. So we use herbs for chronic issues. We use herbs for acute issues. They really shine when we use them on a regular basis for prevention. So let's say you've had a lot of stress in your life, and maybe you end up contracting something like the coronavirus. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but it's just an example. That might be the time that you turn to an herb or a class of herbs or a formula of herbs that have more of a drug-like effect. Even though I really don't think of herbs as drugs, even though a lot of the drugs that we do take that are drugs, either over the counter or through prescription, are either based on herbs originally or even still have some herbs in them in some way, shape, or form. Probably the way that I could feel comfortable is thinking of herbs as crude drugs. And they're crude and compared to over-the-counter prescription medications, excuse me, because they aren't as standardized, basically. And there's different schools of thought about that. If you're an herbalist, you like it when it's not standardized, with a few exceptions, because that means you're getting as close to the plant's activity as possible. And my bias is almost always for the fresh plant. In fact, now that it's spring, I find myself nibbling on Oregon grape flowers, for example. They're really tasty. They're a little bit sour, a little bit bitter, and a little bit sweet. And they have their own kind of vital energy in them that I'm taking in when I just bend over like a goat and nibble on them. Now, that might seem weird to most people, but I'm taking advantage of that plant's vitality right away by taking a piece of it into my system and it doesn't have to be very much to have an effect. So Oregon grape is a nice one to bring up because it's what's called an alterative or alterative. And basically what that means is it's altering the system in some way. A lot of herbs do that for benefit. And so the benefit is with Oregon grape is it's going to act on my liver primarily. And we like the herbs that act on the liver that are alteratives because they benefit the liver in a variety of different ways. Oregon grapes, a really good stimulant to the liver. It helps the liver produce bile, which is a waste product. And because the liver is the filter of the blood, it also affects that process. And because the liver has actually a great deal to do with our immune system, it can also help benefit our immune response. So that might be a good herb to take depending on what was going on with you in times of illness, including potentially the coronavirus. So there are a whole class of other herbs that have different effects on different parts of the body that are alteratives. We have different names for them. Nervines, help with the nerves, obviously. Cholagogue, that works on the gallbladder. Laxatives, well, you know what those do. So there are all sorts of classifications for herbs. And we're just going to kind of focus on herbs that are going to be helpful for prevention and for respiratory system issues, since that's what SARS or COVID-19 or the coronavirus is really going to go after. It's going to center on your probably lower respiratory tract more than anything else. Okay. Drink pause. All right. So if I haven't bored you yet to tears, then you're in good shape. All right. So let's talk about some preventative tonics. Let's talk about adaptogens, okay? And we have a lot of different adaptogens to choose from. There's one that I have been using throughout the course of my current illness as a tea, and that is called Tulsi. Or as a friend of mine from Bangladesh pronounces it, Tulsi. They put their tongue right behind their teeth and kind of soften that tea a little bit. Anyway, Tulsi likes to grow near sacred sites, and that's where it gets its name, holy basil. There's a variety of different kinds of Tulsi basil. And there's a wonderful line of teas that are made with Tulsi as a base, and then they have things like turmeric or ginger or other things with them. Any of those would be really good, or just Tulsi by itself. The reason we like Tulsi is, again, it's an adaptogen, right? And so it has this ability to protect our organs from stress, from toxic things like metals that shouldn't be in our body, from pollutants. And it also helps us recover from physical exertion and respond well to stress. And it also has a ton of antimicrobial activity that's been scientifically documented. And it actually tastes pretty good. So that's a big plus, because with my clients, I'm always looking for patient compliance, right? And a tea is a really wonderful way to take an herb in, because you're also getting the power of water blended with that. And you could easily just be drinking a cup of Tulsi tea every day right now, and that would be a very good thing to do to help your body stay strong and vital and prevent potentially contracting an illness. So lots of things I could say about Tulsi, but it's a type of basil, if I didn't mention that, which is pretty cool, I think. And it's just, got a variety of uses. You could easily research more of it yourself, and that's what I'm going to encourage you to do with any of these suggestions I make, because they may or may not be the right herb for you. But Tulsi is definitely one that's easily accessible. It's inexpensive. You can even grow it. But right now it's still on the shelves because apparently people are grabbing all the toilet paper they can find and hand sanitizer, which, it's a good idea to sanitize your hands, but you're also wiping out the good bacteria that need to be there too. That's another discussion. I'm not saying don't use hand sanitizer, but I'm just pleading for moderation and common sense. Okay. So the other thing, wearing the mask, that's a great idea if you're infectious, if you're already infected, but probably not that practical if you're not. So, and I don't know how many people I've already seen around town wearing a mask and then not following any other protocols. Meanwhile, they've worn that mask all day and it's losing its effectiveness because it's getting damper and moister and just funky in there. If you're breathing, not my idea of how to protect yourself. Sometimes it's a cultural thing. I get it. That's what makes you feel safe. Who am I to say? But yeah, you don't need to wear a mask unless you're concerned that you might be infectious and you're coming in contact with people who aren't infected, but you're concerned that you might infect, especially if they're a vulnerable population, like I mentioned. Okay, so another herb to talk about. This is one that I mentioned in my many emails that some of you might have seen. That's astragalus. Astragalus is a Chinese tonic herb. And there's that word tonic again. But it's also taken when people have symptoms that show up. Obviously, it shines preventatively, but it's a really great herb to take in the event that you have some needs of being buffered in your immune system. There are two main contraindications with astragalus. I'm not aware of any directly with Tulsi, which we just talked about, but astragalus, sometimes because it's in the legume family, people are allergic to pea family stuff, so you want to make sure that you're not one of those. If you have a mild sensitivity, you might have a little bit more gas than you would like. You'll have to weigh if it's worth it or not to take astragalus. That's your issue. The other thing is you do not want to take astragalus when you have an active fever. And the reason for that is astragalus is so good at strengthening what's called in Chinese medicine our wei qi, or our outer qi, that it can actually trap heat in your body, right? And that's not a good thing when you have a fever because you can overheat, and we know what happens when that happens. Things start melting, it gets ugly in a hurry. So you want to take astragalus when you don't have a fever present. The thing about astragalus is, I mentioned the wei qi. Wei qi is basically the Western version of wei qi is our outermost immunity. It's what kind of is our first line of defense and protects us from things that come in. The other nice thing I like about astragalus is it's a really great, like Tulsi, it's a really great lung herb. It strengthens the lung meridian in Chinese medicine. And we know from our studies that in the Western world that it has great benefit for strengthening the lung tissue. And it's also been studied against cancer, other pathogens, even HIV. And most of the information we have from a scientific herbal perspective agrees with the thousands and thousands of years of Chinese wisdom that this is a really wonderful herb to take advantage of. If you're going to make a tea of it, what I recommend is that you do what's called a cold decoction, okay? And so when you make most teas, especially beverage teas, you're making what's called a tisane or an infusion. You just pour boiling hot water over it, let it sit, da-da-da. Now you've got your beverage tea. What I like to do with medicinal teas is if you've got a tea bag, I cut that tea bag open and I dump it into my cup, or if I'm making a lot of tea, which I like to do, I'll put it into a quart jar. All the herbs are loose in there, so they get more contact with the water and make it better, stronger, more medicinal as opposed to beverage tea. And with astragalus, with a cold decoction, you actually start off with room temperature water and let it steep overnight and then warm it up to your desired temperature the next day. That's kind of ideal. With the herbs still in the water, you're warming it up. You don't have to do it that way, but that's the elegant herbal way to do it. And if you're like me, I have kind of a wolf stomach. I like to actually, with all those loose herbs in there, I drink them down. The only time I don't do that is if it's a beverage tea of some kind that I've added that might have some essential oils or something that would be hard for me to digest or break down, like barks or roots or something really heavy. But you get to make that call. That way I feel like I'm honoring the herb, and the essence of the herb is also honoring me by going into my body, not just the water extract. But it's totally okay just to do water extract too. I am obviously all in with the herbs, so that's my process. A few more things about astragalus. It's a really good, obviously warming herb because its ability to keep the chi or the heat energy in the body. So it's a great herb to use if you're going outside a lot or you're going to be around people a lot. And it helps moisten the lungs. Sometimes people take astragalus with ginseng because they're very, very complementary. In fact, if you're a younger person, astragalus is probably your herb because it's keeping all that energy in. And I don't know about you, but most young people I'm around always seem to be giving their energy away for free. And I'm like, hey, can I have some? But they're often taking ginseng because they've heard, ooh, ginseng for energy. Well, you can do ginseng at any age, but if you're going to do it when you're young, you should combine it with astragalus and also something called red dates if you're making tea. That's a whole nother story. But ginseng's kind of for people that are outside of their 20s for the most part, unless you've got a real endurance or activity reason to take ginseng. Because ginseng does the opposite of astragalus. It takes our inner core energy and makes sure it goes everywhere in our body. And it's very yang herb or yang, meaning it's really intense. And so you can easily get too much of it. But it's another adaptogen that would also be useful for stress. And now that I'm an old man, I find I can actually handle ginseng. Usually I mix it with other stuff though. I guess I'm just a very young individual. It's not necessarily something I need a lot of, but I do like it. So that's astragalus. A couple other herbs to focus on that are adaptogens. There's something called Chinese asparagus root. There's a Ayurvedic counterpart called shatavari. And asparagus root is another tonic herb, and as is shatavari, which is the Indian asparagus root. Either one of those are good. They're a really good lung herb and a really good energy herb. And they are purported to increase the Shen. And in Taoist philosophy, Shen is basically like spirit. And since we're also interested in shamanic and spirit things here, this is a really wonderful herb to take at any time to increase your connection to spirit or Shen, your inner connection as well as your outer connection. So it opens up your heart. It tonifies the heart energy and the kidney energy. And it's in Chinese medicine, it's said to help the lungs extract qi, right? Because there's all different kinds of qi. And so the lungs are, in Chinese belief, bringing in qi from the air, essentially, and helping the body utilize it. So asparagus root can help with that. Again, it's an adaptogen, right? So it's going to be good for stress. And I find in people that have emotional instability, maybe they're going through a tough time or that's just an issue they have, this can be a really good herb for them. So really wonderful thing to consider taking that again as a tea, and it's a root. So you're probably going to want to decoct it, meaning to actually boil at a very low temperature, covered your asparagus root. Okay. One more to talk about. This is another kind of ginseng you may have heard of called Siberian ginseng, primarily because the Russians were the ones who really brought this to the forefront, although it had been around for a long, long time in Chinese medicine. But they were looking for something that they could grow or use that wasn't regular ginseng. And they looked up Eleutherococcus, which is a long name, but that's what it's called. And I realized that this was actually going to be pretty good for their athletic program, their space program, and all that stuff. So Siberian ginseng is a really interesting plant. We have a counterpart here that's called Devil's Club. Not interchangeable, but has some similar properties. And then there's another similar plant, and all these are ginseng family plants, called Aurelia, which there's a few different varieties that grow here in Southern Oregon and Northern California. All of them have an affinity for the lungs, and they also have an affinity for energy. And right now, this is one of the best things to take for strengthening your lungs and giving you a calming kind of energy that's not going to buzz you out. which sometimes the regular ginseng you're used to can do. I tend to, excuse me, I tend to radiate towards taking this kind of ginseng more than the Panax ginseng, just because it seems to have a real affinity for me, and it's really good, not just for lung stuff, but for depression, and depression can affect your immune system. We call it immunodepression. And honestly, sometimes I have trouble with that, particularly in the winter time, and I find that this is one of the things that can be really helpful for that. Really nice thing to consider. All right. So those four are ones that we focused on. Other ones I want to mention would be ashwagandha. Okay, and you can look that one up. That's a really nice adaptive tonic. Another really good one is reishi mushroom, Ganoderma. That's a really wonderful immune tonic. There are a lot of really good mushroom immune tonics. That's just one of them. Some people, provided they don't have heart issues or high blood pressure or adrenal issues, licorice root is really good. And if you can get Chinese licorice root, it's much kinder on your system. Any of those are going to be really good adaptogens. So a little bit of time left to talk about alternatives. Okay, you may have looked at the email I sent. One of the most important ones that I think we could take right now, particularly if you feel some symptoms coming on, because it's not a tonic herb. It's not something you want to take like the other herbs that we just mentioned long term. It's something you want to take while you're actually dealing with a cold or flu virus or the coronavirus, and that is lomatium root. And the root, the name of the root in Latin is Lomatium dissectum. Tastes nasty, but it does a job. And it's shown some in vitro, meaning test tube, basically, effects against something called the rotavirus, which can be a nasty enterovirus or digestive system virus that often attacks children. And that's pretty significant. Now, does that mean it's going to work against coronavirus? Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. We do know that historically lomatium was used by First Nations people against the flu epidemic of 1918, 1916, that era. And according to anecdotal reports, which again, not scientific, was really effective in protecting them. And in part, I'm sure that's because of lomatium's wonderful supportive nature towards our lung system and our entire respiratory system. So lomatium's a really wonderful herb. It has proven antiviral effects and definitely would be something I would take if I started to show more serious symptoms than I did. The other thing I might partner with it is another wonderful herb called osha root. And osha root is ligusticum. Both osha and lomatium are in the Umbelliferae family, or Apiaceae, wild carrot family. Because they have really wonderful, beautiful flowers shaped like a basket or an umbrella. And the root and osha is really powerful lung stuff. It's also used in sacred medicine with peyote ceremony for nausea, and it's bear medicine. Bears actually dig it up and eat it. It's so good. They will, I've seen bear digs where they've chewed up the whole root. So, you know, if you're aware, and we're animal people here, I know on this channel, there's a whole bunch of wonderful stories from native tradition about the relationship between bear and osha root. In fact, one of my little kitties looks like a bear cat, so his name's Osha. So I love Osha. All right. Now there's a lot of lung herbs you could be taking in addition to those two. Those are kind of premier. So anything that you come across in your studies that are telling you that they're going to support the lungs in some way are worth trying. I could toss out a bunch of names to you, but what we'll probably do is end up helping you with some links later on that you can have access to. But elecampane root is another good lung herb. Another good lung herb is sanicle or snake root. You know, the list goes on and on and on. But if you do your own research and you look up some of these herbs, you also want to make sure that you check out what kind of contraindications there are, and try to match whatever symptoms you have with the knowledge of the herb. And then that will help you avoid any side effects, which herbs don't really have, but anything that could be problematic. And of course, you want to be careful if you're taking medication of any kind already when you take an herb, because it can disrupt how your body processes that, because a lot of these herbs work on the liver, and they can change the way your body, like I said, processes or even detoxifies an herb. So herbs are not little teddy bears. Even though we love them, they are powerful beings and they need to be respected. So make sure you do your homework, or ask a knowledgeable herbalist like myself, or somebody in your community who can really guide you competently. Okay, so I think that's probably close to what I have to share, and it's a little after 5 now, so I want to respect the clock. We've got about 20 plus minutes left.
Okay, Lawrence, thank you. What we're going to do next is.
Okay, so we're just now past the half hour point. So we're kind of going to move away from the discussion about the disease process and start talking about what you're really here for, I hope, which is what I'm here for, herbs. Okay, and so last time I had kind of I would say a little bit of a scattershot approach in terms of what kind of herbs I was suggesting. And also, hopefully you got a hold of my email that came out that suggested some protocols for you to get started on. Because I don't know about you, but if you've looked around to get herbs lately, they're starting to dry up, the supplies for them. And that's concerning. So, what I'm hoping to do is kind of give you some off-label, in a sense, herbs that maybe aren't as well known, that haven't been depleted yet. And I'm in a very difficult position as an herbalist and an ecologist, because it's really vital that I act as a steward to these plants and they don't end up being needlessly used or exploited in ways that, number one, aren't going to help people anyway, and number two, could actually cause some serious resource depletion of people I really consider my friends. I'm a plant person. My name is Birch, and I have a lot of green allies, and I shudder to think about what's going to happen to these plants in their native communities when people who don't know what they're doing end up interacting with them, let's say, in ways that are irresponsible. And a story about that, just as an aside, my teacher, early in his days as an herbalist, let it slip that, there's a bunch of valerian root growing on this hillside, to somebody who wanted to know what he was doing. And when he came back, whoever he had talked to had taken upon himself, and probably with some other people, to just rip out as many plants as they could, causing erosion and destroying that plant community. It's kind of the equivalent of people finding out about a vulnerable population and raping and pillaging them. So we really want to keep aware of the herbs that we're using and be as responsible stewards of these plants as we can, because they're really here to help us, but we also have to be there to help and protect them. Okay. Pretty obvious, I would think, but never bad to kind of remind somebody of that. So one of the herbs that I mentioned the last time that's in this category is osha root, right? Ligusticum porteri. And we like osha root because it's a really wonderful lung herb. But in some communities, it's been over harvested. It's a really amazing plant. There's some Chinese analog ligusticums. I had the good fortune of getting to spend all day with a science researcher whose whole PhD study was on ligusticums. And he had some amazing stories, and I want to share a few of those with you, because I think they're very illustrative of what the plant people and our relationship to them and the animals actually mean in terms of significance. So this gentleman's name is Sean Stigstead, and as far as I know, he got his PhD. I hope so. 20 years ago, he was still working on it. But he did research with OSHA, and one of the more moving stories was about research he did with grizzly bears and OSHA root. Osha means bear. I may have mentioned my cat's name is Osha. And so he acquired some Osha root from northern Mexico, not New Mexico, but actual Mexico, the country, and threw some pieces into the bear cage. I believe it was at a Colorado zoo where two grizzlies were, male and female. And the bears instantly coveted the big chunks of Osha root that they had. And they both went to separate areas in the cave, in their cage. And the female started chewing her root up, and then she basically spit it into her paws and started rubbing herself all over with it. This is Osha root, topical application. And the male bear did this really odd thing. He kind of started to do the same thing, and then he took a big chunk of his root and he looked over at the female. And you got to keep in mind, like, male and female grizzly bears, probably not the nicest companions to each other because, hey, they're bears and they're grizzly bears. So they fought a lot. So it was really quite stunning what this bear did. And every time I talk about it, I get emotional because it's so touching. And it's not anthropomorphizing. It's really just, this is animal behavior. He went over with his root and actually gave it to the female bear, which, you know, they probably hadn't seen Osha root for I don't know however long they've been in captivity. And it was a real gift. And it turned out that Sean Sigstead found out that the female was suffering from arthritis. And the topical application of Osha root may have actually been helping her with that arthritis. So there's a lot in this story that I find really touching. The other aspect is Mr. Sigstead was at a gathering of First Nations people, and he asked about Osha root. And one of the participants shared with him that, what we like to do with it traditionally is we chew it up and we spit it in our hands and we rub it all over ourselves. And he just looked at him, and I think the person unbidden said, we learned about that from the animals. So they watched and they observed, you know, and that's a really wonderful thing. And obviously when we take Osha, we like to use it for its, in this particular situation, for its lung supportive effects. But we also need to be cognizant of how many other uses these herbs have and how many other applications and animals interact with them, and really beautiful things there are about them that we may not even be able to dream about, but if we're lucky, we'll come in contact with. So let's talk about some of these herbs. So one of the things to keep in mind is the concept of antivirals, okay? And so in the herb world, we really don't have a lot of plants that are directly what I would call virucidal, right? Meaning they have some kind of constituent in them that kills an actual virus. I've talked about lomation before. That's one that does. It kills a rotavirus. That's been proven at least in vitro studies. There are a few others that do that. Primarily when we're talking about herbs that are antiviral, we mean that they do something to help the body mount a defense against viruses. And that's an important distinction because what we're counting on there is a partnership, right? So our bodies are really pretty damn intelligent. And the more we study them, the more we know, but the more we also find out we don't know. And so viruses are things that have been around far longer than we have. But fortunately, our friends, the plants, have also been around a lot longer than we have. And they have figured out ways to combat viruses, and that's what we take advantage of when we take an herb into our systems. We're relying on that plant's knowledge and experience to help us fight off whatever it is we're targeting, in this case, coronavirus. So there's a really wonderful antimicrobial herb that's actually a combination of things. It's a lichen, right? And that's Usnea. It's also called old man's beard, but Usnea is the USNEA. Usnea barbata is the most common species that's used. Is a lichen, old man's beard, that grows on trees. And it has this very distinguishable characteristic that when you pull apart part of its body or its thallus, I don't know if you've had this happen to your socks where
the elastic is starting to go out, but there's this elastic cord of the usnea that you pull, and the cortex, the outer skin of it, separates from the inner elastic portion, and that's what we call a field characteristic that helps us identify this lichen from other ones, because there's a lot of lichens out there. So the thing about usnea that we like is that it's very effective at killing just about anything. Extracts of it are used in the cosmetic industry as preservatives because it's able to take on so many pathogens. There's a lot of different ideas about how to prepare usnea in terms of its delivery into the body. Some people feel like it needs to be cooked a lot in order to separate the usneic acid from the body of the usnea lichen. Tinctures are generally what you're going to make. You may make a decoction of it, and then which is boiling the herb basically, and then add it to an alcohol solvent in order to get both the alcohol soluble and the water soluble components. Mostly what you're going to see in e-commerce is as a tincture, and you would just take that at regular rates, half a dropper to one dropper, 4 to 5 times a day. And this is what you'll be taking when you actually feel some symptoms coming on. This is not, as I discussed before, tonic herb. It's something that you take short term when you have acute symptoms showing up, okay, usnea. And it's going to help with your lungs. Usnea and other lichens are kind of like the lungs of the earth. They look like lung tissue. There's something called doctrine of signatures, which means plants kind of look like our body, sometimes have an affinity for helping or healing or supporting the body. And that is the case with usnea. So another herb that I may have mentioned briefly before, and there's been some different ideas about it, is echinacea, right? Everybody knows about echinacea because back in the day, 20 years ago, echinacea was on everything. I wish I had saved it, but there was a box of cornflakes that had echinacea on it one time, right? Because that's what happens with herbs. They get trendy, and then before you know it, you've got echinacea underwear, echinacea everything. And unfortunately, that's not probably the best use of that herb. Again, this is an herb that you take as a tonic, except for certain circumstances, because it's really an immune stimulant or immune modulator, and it's not something that you want to just have every day in a bowl with milk on it. You want to save it and use it when your body really needs it. Because there's another principle of all these herbs that interact with the immune system, and that is the immune system is very smart, and it tends to kind of accommodate itself after a while, or learn how to interact with the herb in such a way that it no longer becomes effective. So keep in mind, as I'm suggesting these, that you want to probably get in your arsenal, if you want to call it that, although I really don't like the whole martial idea and war idea that we're into this. Because, as I'll be talking about later in my podcast, these viruses, as much as we may not like them, they're our kin. We have a relationship with them. And I talked before about the concept of soil being just as important, meaning our bodies, what's going on in our bodies, as the concept of germ theory, right? Yes, pathogens cause disease, but it's really what's going on in our bodies that's going to determine just what kind of disease we're going to get. So with echinacea, you want to take it as a tincture, probably, maybe as a water extract, but again, probably best as a tincture that has some water extractives in it. And you want to take it, again, regularly when you feel something coming on. And it's going to help with your overall immunity, but it's also going to help potentially with a response to increased response with your macrophages, which are kind of your cleanup garbage men, right? And again, a lot of these herbs may not actually have the kind of antiviral activity that we would ideally like if we could just wave our magic wand. But because they're going to support other aspects of our immune system, they may help prevent some of the downstream issues that are going to show up when you get the COVID disease showing up and causing lung issues or other things, if that makes sense. There's a really interesting herb that's similar to echinacea that people often use as a substitute for it, particularly in tropical areas where it grows really well. And that herb's called Spilanthes, S-P-I-L-A-N-T-H-E-S. Lanthes. The interesting thing about this herb is echinacea and spilanthes both have this kind of numbing, tingling quality when you take them into your oral mucosa. And that's an indication of something powerful going on. And spilanthes is also called the toothache herb because it was used topically to numb rotten teeth. And there's also some immune modulating properties to spilanthes, potentially similar to echinacea, that you should look at, that most people probably don't know about because it hasn't become a trendy popular herb like echinacea has yet. There's another immunostimulant herb that's been used in traditional formulas for a long time, and that's Japanese honeysuckle. And it's Lonicera japonica, Lonicera. Okay. And again, do we know if it's going to work against the coronavirus? Well, we don't, but we know that it has an affinity for the immune system, and it's been used for a long, long time to help people fight off other types of colds and viruses. So it may be the herb for you. The other thing to keep in mind is that we can all take the same herb but have different responses to it. And the key factor with that, which I may have already mentioned, but it's worth mentioning again, is that we grew up and evolved with these plants. So when you give somebody a whole plant or as close to the original plant product as possible, then our body sort of gets to select what it wants from it. I haven't talked about respiratory herbs in particular yet, but just to illustrate this and to throw another term out there, which I know you'd like to know more terms, because I'm all about the terms. There's a wonderful lung herb called mullein, okay? And all parts of the mullein can be used, the flowers, the root. But for lung issues, it's the leaf that's really beneficial. And if you're somebody who's got some lung issues already, like asthma, for example, mullein might be your herb. And the reason is because when you take mullein in as a tea or a tincture, the leaf, it does some pretty amazing supportive things to our lungs. And if you have an issue with asthma, it can actually, in some cases, help arrest a mild asthma attack. And it acts as a bronchodilator because primarily that's what happens. It's hard to get air back out when you have an asthma attack. It just kind of stays trapped in there trapped in your lungs because of the constriction of the bronchi. Now, the other thing about mullein is it has this really interesting quality of being able to do seemingly opposite or even paradoxical things. And there are a few different herbs that do this. So one herb that does this to really a great extent is mullein. And mullein can act as both a cough suppressant when you've been coughing too much and you've got a really bad inflammation happening, and maybe you're dry coughing at this point, so there's nothing coming out, but you're so irritated and so inflamed, all you can do is cough. And then let's say it suppresses the cough for a while, and now maybe the script is flipped a little bit and you've got some buildup of mucus in your lungs that you really need to get out. You can actually use mullein, the same herb, and it will act as an expectorant. So it not just doesn't just act as a cough suppressant, it also acts as a cough so it acts as a expectorant as well as a suppressant of coughs. Same herb, same person, different needs, and that's because the plant presents an array of chemicals, naturals, that our bodies are smart enough. Okay, pretty amazing. And there's a term for bliss of stolen that. Well, let's borrow the chemistry world to use it with plants to do these things that we talked about. They go both ways. They can do opposite things.
Looks like Lawrence is freezing on us, you guys. The internet is overloaded, as you can imagine, and people have been reporting. It's not your computer, it's the internet is freezing up. So as soon as Lawrence figures it out, he's gonna probably sign off and come back on. So, yeah, I'm sorry about that. But, you know, it's pretty amazing that we have this capability at all, and I'm really grateful for it. I'm really grateful that we have this capability. I thought it was especially interesting about mullein. I didn't know. And, you know, it's one of those herbs that you can grow in your garden, so you don't have to worry about all that business of over-harvesting wild herbs. Mullein and also echinacea you can grow in your garden. I don't know about Conocera japonica, the Japanese honeysuckle, but I want to grow it in my garden. I think it would be beautiful. Come on, Lawrence, come on back. He's back.
Yeah, somebody unexpectedly came into my studio here and used the microwave. I think it cut me off.
Okay, well, you're back, my friend.
Sorry
there you go.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yahoo. All right. So maybe you had a nice little break there.
We were just talking about how you can actually grow some of these herbs in your garden and not tax the resource.
Yeah, and mullein's a great herb because it's considered to be a pest and a weed, right? As so many wonderful herbs are. So people will actually be happy when you come and take it. And there's so much of it, and it's so prolific. I don't think you're really going to hurt it. But you can also grow it too. So, okay. So let's talk about another plant that's kind of getting some attention, and that's elder. Okay. We like elder because it is just, it's a super tree. I mean, it's got so much character to it. Elder trees are really aptly named because they seem to be really wise, to me anyway. And what I really like about elders is they're so all-purpose. You can actually eat the flowers. You can make fritters out of them. Haven't done that yet, but I've had some really wonderful elderflower cordials and wine. And then when the fruit shows up, you can do all sorts of things with the fruit. Those are excuse me, those are typically the parts of the elder that are used in commercial preparations. But what I'm also going to do is discuss using elder again in kind of an off-label way. And by off-label, I would mean consider short-term use for some people, not everybody, of not just the leaves, sorry, not just the berries and the flowers, but the leaves and maybe even the bark. There's been some discussion of elder's antiviral properties being really not strong enough unless you're using the leaves and bark. I had a discussion with a fellow herbalist of mine about this, and his take was that it might not work for everybody, and it also might cause some toxicity. It also might be pretty laxative. So you're going to have to probably use elder if you want to incorporate leaves and bark within a formula, or be very judicious about your use of it and pay attention. So if you are a person who's a medicine maker and you already have access to elder, it's just kind of starting to leaf out now in the North Country. Down here where I am in Southern California right now, there's a lot of it in the lower elevations that's actually collectible. What you would do based on the protocols that I've kind of been shown from different herbalists is to make what's called a decoction with the leaves and the bark, right? So depending on whether you're using dried elder, which you could buy potentially, or fresh elder leaves if you have access, you'd want to use probably roughly 2 ounces of dry elder to 4 ounces of elder fresh, and that could be a mixture of bark, could be a mixture, could be just be leaves, could be bark and leaves, and then you're going to put these into a quart of water, okay, and you're going to essentially boil them and allow them to simmer for a period of time until you've reduced about half of the water volume. So you're going to get something that's really thick. And then you would strain that off. You're probably going to end up with maybe a cup, maybe 2 cups. So we're looking at 8, maybe 16 ounces of finished liquid. And there's been different ideas about, well, now you're going to add alcohol to this. Is the alcohol something that's going to preserve it, or is the alcohol going to act to extract more of it? And the reason you're cooking the leaves and the bark is because some people react to this part of the elder, and it can be any elder, red elder, black elder, purple or blue flowered, blue fruited elder, with having nausea. Nothing that's really serious unless that's going to be a problem for you. But by decocting the leaves and the bark before you make a tincture, you're destroying the principle that could cause nausea in people for the most part, ideally. Okay. So now you've got a choice to make. If you want to also get more of the principles out of the elder, you can keep the leaves and the bark in the water tea that you've made, essentially, and now you're going to add the same volume of 100% alcohol. If you have access to that, it should be like Everclear, or you're going to reduce it a little bit more by leaving it on the stove to simmer until you're down to maybe a cup or more, and then add 50% vodka to it, right? So if you're following this, which I realize is probably a little difficult, so I'll have some protocols to send out to you. So make sure you share your email with myself or Carla, either by phone or with my email. So you're going to end up then either tincturing with alcohol the water, tea, and bark and leaves all together for at least 2 weeks. Or if you really like, you can't wait that long, then what you'll do is strain off the leaves and the bark, take that tea, and add an equal amount by volume of alcohol. If you have 50% vodka, that's great. If you have 40% vodka, that's still acceptable. And ideally, you have something like Everclear or 96% vodka. Right? So equal volumes at the end. Hopefully you got enough of that. You can kind of figure it out. And like I said, I'll make a little bit more clear statement with it. Now, here's the thing. If you just have elder flowers and berries, like in a syrup, which is a really common thing, it's a very popular remedy in Europe, you're going to get some effects from that that'll help you with fever and some other things, but it probably won't be as potent against the virus. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but do consider, if you have access, trying this elder formula. And again, short term, be very careful about taking it if you have some symptoms show up like diarrhea, or you feel like it's got some liver toxicity too, because that's the thing. We're still trying some stuff, and we're not really sure how this is going to work in all people. And unfortunately, some of these herbs are on the edge of being toxic, but they're still going to be beneficial. So we're going to have to just consider trying them. Kind of like, in a way, how I talked about chloroquine, right? Because it's an anti-malarial drug, and maybe for some people it's going to be a lifesaver, but for other people there's going to be side effects that they can't really accommodate very well, and it's going to be counterproductive for them to take it. Okay. So this brings up another issue that's also been bandied about in the herbal world, which is something called a cytokine storm. All right. And cytokine storm is basically an extreme version of something called cytokine release syndrome, okay, or CRS. And so people that end up in kind of advanced infection states, like they might with SARS, which is what the COVID viruses, the coronavirus is known to cause, or something else, any kind of acute respiratory distress syndrome, even sepsis, which is an infection in the blood, certain kinds of immunologic situations. The body basically throws everything it can at wherever it thinks the pathogen is or the affected tissue, and so doing ends up damaging healthy tissue collaterally. And then this causes an acceleration of the inflammation process. It's kind of basically a runaway storm in the body that can be very hard to control. Why I'm bringing this up is because there's been some controversy saying that maybe elder can actually precipitate cytokine storm, or even some of the other immune herbs like echinacea. And there really hasn't been any scientific literature nor observational data to support this. Does that mean it won't happen, or it doesn't happen for people? There's always going to be outliers. We don't know. But I don't think this is something, with the information that I have, that would be a general concern. Now, if you're one of these people who's in a special category, by special I mean you've got some wonky immune stuff happening, maybe you've got some immune system disorders, maybe you just want to play it on the safe side and don't want to mess around with something that's an immune modulator. Maybe you want to stick with more of a lung herb, just to be safe. And you're not going to miss out, believe me. There's a lot of good things that you can do to help yourself during this time without having to worry about falling victim to a cytokine storm. But as far as I can tell, elder is not really something to be concerned about with this particular issue, the cytokine release syndrome or cytokine storm. Okay, so we'll just put that to bed. Okay, so a few more immune or immune lymphatic herbs to talk about, and then we'll just kind of talk about a few lung herbs that I haven't mentioned before. So you may remember last time I talked about Oregon grapefruit as an alternative, not an alternative, which is a misspelling in thanks to spell check in my email post, but alternative. An alternative is an old-fashioned word that also was linked to another old-fashioned term called a blood purifier. And really the only blood purifier that we have is our liver, which literally filters our blood. But in the old days, they used to think that these herbs somehow did something special to the blood. And most of them, and this is an herb that I'm going to mention, which is no exception, they help the liver in some way purify the blood. And in doing so, they benefit our immune system and our whole body. Our liver is kind of like the quartermaster you could think of if you're familiar with the military. It's like the storekeeper of our body. It's who decides who gets what. And oftentimes, our skin is lowest on the list. And so if you have bad skin, it's usually often an indication that your liver is impaired in some way, because it ends up, our brain gets a whole bunch of energy and treats, you might say, from the liver, as does some other important organs. And our skin is kind of like, skin, yeah, it's important for sure. But the body doesn't think it's as important. So why is this critical to understand? Well, when you take a blood purifier, and the herb that I'm going to suggest, similar to Oregon grape but different, is burdock, one to consider, because it's going to act on your lymphatic system as well as your liver to help purify it, in the sense that it's going to improve the efficiency of your skin, which is an organ, detoxifying itself. It's also going to help the liver process things, which is really important when you're dealing with an illness that's producing a lot of waste products like COVID can. And it's also a diuretic mildly, so it's going to help move fluids through and potentially toxins and waste through the kidneys without overtaxing them. It's also a really good blending plant with some other herbs like elecampane, if you want it to also have lung effect with liver effect. And it's also delicious. You can eat burdock, the root, and it's one of my favorite root vegetables. Shredded in a little bit of brown rice vinegar with maybe a little sesame sauce, soy sauce, sesame seeds. Oh my goodness, just simple, really tasty stuff. So there are vegetables out there that are also herbs masquerading that can really help you. And the interesting thing about burdock is part of its detoxification pathway seems to be through our skin. And our skin is our largest organ in terms of surface area. And it's nice to be able to take advantage of that. And there's a lot of skin conditions that burdock helps as well because of this interesting action. So maybe not the first herb you might think about because, oh, well, it's for the skin, it's for the liver, but we're talking about immune, and we're talking about lungs with coronavirus herbs. But don't sell those short. When you enlist other parts of your body, other organs, or other systems to help you and be supported, they can also, in an indirect way, take some of the stress or pressure off of the other organs that you're working with. Okay, so take a look at considering burdock as a tea, tincture, or if you have access to fresh root, another good tonic to take long term, because in that sense, as the root, it's really more of a tonic long term that you could take during the course of our pandemic. Another herb I really like, I have a friend who's a client of mine who is looking at her third surgery because she's got this rampant infection going on, which I tend to think is probably nosocomial or hospital acquired, in which her physicians are backpedaling and pointing the fingers and not taking responsibility for it, which is a whole tragic story. But with her, she agreed to try cleavers, okay, which is an amazing lymphatic tonic. Cleavers is called that because it cleaves or sticks to you, right? If you have pets, you know about cleavers because there's always green little trails of it coming off of them when they go out and do their business and come back in the house. Cleavers is coming up right now. And again, not maybe the first herb you might think about because it doesn't have this big, Incredible Hulk aspect to it, but in its own way, it's actually a green Incredible Hulk because, again, it's more vegetable action and it's nutritive and it's completely mild and hardly interacts with anything at all, according to literature research I've done. So it makes it safe if you're somebody who's taking a bunch of stuff. For the most part, again, you have to do your own research, and you maybe can't take some of these other herbs because you can't afford to have them interact with your liver or your immune system. So, okay, well, here you go. Try cleavers, okay? I really like cleavers as a succus, meaning juiced fresh. It's really stringy, so if you don't have something like a Vitamix, or even if you do, you're gonna have to chop it up into little pieces because it'll turn into a rope and wrap around the bottom of your blender and just kind of look at you and go, yeah, what are you trying to do here? Because I'm just spinning around like this is the best roller coaster ride ever, and it won't end up macerating enough for you to really get it. So you take your fresh cleavers, put that in your blender, chop it up, and then you add some vinegar to it, and then some purified water, and you puree it really good, and leave the herb in there, pour it all into a container, and if you have enough vinegar in there to preserve it, which will probably be about 25% by volume, the fresh herb will keep in your refrigerator for a while, and you can use that as a tonic. And that will help cool your lymphatic system and also act as a detoxifier and just be a general really good thing for it. Okay, so another herb that's a really powerful lymphatic support is something you may have heard of called red root or ceanothus. There's a lot of ceanothus, so it's a safe one to use in large amounts for the most part because there's a lot of different varieties of it. And if you use it responsibly, it's probably not going to get over harvested. We like ceanothus, Ceanothus, because it's really effective in helping declutter the lymphatic system. So when the lymphatic system, which is kind of the housing for our immune system, works better, that means the cellular component of our immune system, the white blood cells, the T cells, and all the things they produce like interleukins and other pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory chemicals, they're all just going to work better because of ceanothus. And so you can take that as a tea. It actually was drunk as a tea by our colonists when they couldn't get tea from England or didn't want it anymore because there's a variety in the East Coast that has some trace caffeine in it. But it also really stands out well as a tincture, and it's something you could take during the course of this, probably for a couple weeks at a time, and then switch to something else. So a couple more herbs, and then we've got enough time for some questions. So let me see what else I have on my list. So, I mentioned mullein, and last time I mentioned elecampane. A couple other herbs for the lungs I want to talk about. Lobelia and pleurisy root, okay? Pleurisy root, maybe you've heard about pleurisy. It's an old-fashioned term for people that would have lung complaints to the point where the lining around their lungs would get scarred if they had it really badly. And pleurisy root is indicated when you have really dry lungs and you need them moistened. Now, the concern with the coronavirus is that eventually it's damaging enough to the lung tissue that there's going to be some boggy elements to it, and you're going to have fluid buildup, and you might end up with pneumonia. In my discussion with one of my herbalist friends, he was cautioning about using pleurisy root because it might contribute to boggy lung tissue. Now, I really like Asclepias herbs, and there's a few different kinds of them, and that's what pleurisy root is. If you've ever seen butterfly weed, not butterfly bush, but butterfly weed, it's got red and orange flowers, and it's grown to bring out butterflies. Milkweed, it's kind of a type of that. That's what pleurisy root looks like. I tend to think I would probably use it with maybe an herb that was more astringent, maybe with some ceanothus, just so you have both things in the system. And again, that principle of the body taking what it needs, it could probably manage a condition that's probably going to happen to some folks later stages of the coronavirus where their lungs are going to fill up with fluid, because it's also going to support expectorating. And it's also going to support some comfort in the area, because if you've been coughing a lot, you can actually cough and break a rib, and you can get really sore from coughing. And pleurisy root is going to be a benefit for that particular issue. So.
Oh no, did he freeze again? Oh no. Well, while we're waiting for Lawrence to come back, did you guys see, Lawrence said lobelia, and then he said pleurisy root. So I'm wondering if somebody, oh, are you back, Lawrence? Did somebody follow that and know what pleurisy root is?
I just looked it up as he was talking, and let's see what that said. It's also called something star flower, and let's see if I can find a picture.
I won't be able to share it with you.
Well, I could put it in my background, but you can look it up online. It's relatively common. I don't know if the root is common. I haven't looked online.
Okay, that's fine. I was just curious if somebody knew. Let me see. Lawrence, are you back?
About it.
Yeah, I'm
Serious
back.
safety
Okay, Lawrence
concerns.
is back, Paula. We got him.
Sorry
Okay.
about that. It's just what's happening.
That's okay. Let me see if I can get you back onto Spotlight. All right, there you go, Lawrence.
Okay. So I was talking about pleurisy root. The other herb that I was just finishing up with was lobelia.
Yeah, so it's different. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And lobelia, whereas I was talking about pleurisy root, may not be the best when, and if you started to show signs of pneumonia, lobelia would be an excellent herb to use when you did actually start to experience pneumonia-like conditions, because it's really good for dampness and it's going to help dry things out. And you want to take small doses of it, like 5 to 10 drops of the tincture. And you want to be really careful at the beginning to see how your nausea level is with it, because it could act as an emetic. But it's relaxing the lungs, also allowing them to eliminate mucus. And it's also going to be really helpful, maybe by itself, maybe in a formula, like pleurisy root in a formula, to really address some deeper lung stuff. Okay. So I think, I'm not sure how stable things are going to be with my connection. So I think I'll just turn this over to questions now. And I'll
Okay.
work
How
with
we're going to do this is, if you have a question, we've got quite a lot of people here. If you could just pull yourself off mute yourself, that's the easiest way. There's a little microphone next to you someplace. Just pull yourself off mute and ask your question.
I have a question, Laura.
Great.
Hi, my
What's
name is my name's Harmony. I'm in Oregon too,
Hi, Harmony.
and my husband, he's right here with me, and he wants to know about what you might know about fenugreek as to help with these times.
Mm-hmm. Is he using fenugreek for something else, or why the fenugreek?
I use it as basically as a tonic, as a cleanser. I've read about it as being very good for cleaning out the lymph and so forth.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Trying to remember. Fenugreek has some really interesting properties to it.
I first ran across it in a book called Bees Don't Get Arthritis. Interesting.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Beekeepers don't get arthritis, or bees too. Yeah, because you get
No,
some.
bees themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see. So fenugreek, it's got some astringent qualities to it, and it's also got some anti-allergy properties to it. That's what I've used it for with people. And it actually seems to be pretty effective for that. So the thing about that is it's going to be somewhat systemic, but also lung-centered, respiratory-centered. So if you have an issue, maybe already, as a lot of people do as spring is starting to emerge with pollen or other things, I've had people use it for allergies that seem respiratory-centered with good benefit. So you might actually find that it's going to help with whatever kind of coronavirus symptoms would show up, because it's going to be helpful to your respiratory as kind of an anti-inflammatory, I guess is how I would characterize it, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, who'd like to ask a question? Barbara, can you pull yourself off mute? There you go.
Yeah, hi. I just want to say thank you so much. It's just been really interesting, and thank you for taking the time and sharing your expertise with us. And I have a question about, I can't take alcohol or vinegar. What can I do if I want to use any of these herbs? Is there a substitute that I can?
You're a fungal person. You're dealing with fungal stuff, right? Is that what you're talking about this? Or
Yeah, lime and lime and mold toxin.
okay, well, water extracts, teas are so anything like astragalus, and just because I said you can make a vinegar succus out of cleavers doesn't mean you have to. It just kind of makes it more preservative, and vinegar is alkalinizing, so that's why we like it in the body. You can just use water, or if you like aloe juice, you could use aloe juice to make a fresher preparation. And you could also make another fresher preparation with the whole above ground parts of calendula if you wanted to. That would be another nice kind of smoothie or something you wanted to do.
Mm. I pulled Barbara back onto mute again. Thanks, Barbara.
The replacement was nettle.
Oh, nettle. Okay. We're losing you again, Lawrence. Well, while he's not there, Lawrence is getting his mailing list together. Yes. And in the meanwhile, if I'm going to send a follow-up out onto my general mailing list. If you are not on the Spirit Healer mailing list, go to SpiritHealer.com and click join, and you'll join the mailing list, and then you'll get the follow-up email to this. And I'm going to have a link in it to Lawrence's email sign-up page. Aren't I, Lawrence?
Yes, you are. I'm sorry I keep disappearing. I don't know what's happening. So, just.
Yeah, it's just because everybody and his brother now is on Zoom across the globe.
That's true.
That's what's happening.
I can stay on a little longer past the 5:30 mark to kind of make up for my disappearance. So maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So I'll try to do that.
More questions for Mr. Birch.
Yes, Mr. Birch.
I have a question.
Okay.
My name's Ava, and I'm currently taking Isatis root and Siddha Akuta, and it seems to be helping just my overall like core strength and well-being. And I just felt really called to the herbs, but I don't know too much about them, and was wondering if you have any information on them.
Yeah, and what was the second? You said Isatis, and what was the second herb you mentioned?
Siddha Akuta, SIDA
Oh,
space.
Sida. Oh, okay, okay.
ACTA.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about Latin, right? It's a dead language, so you get to pronounce it how you want. Isatis is woad, right? So, yeah, that's another herb that I didn't really talk about. And there's also another herb that's kind of related to it called Baptisia. And if I remember correctly, is Isatis a mustard? It's really very productive. And in Oregon, at least, I think it's one of the bad guys because it tends to take over. But what you're getting, so I'm curious. So why did you end up with that particular combination of herbs, and what are you taking it for? And you have an affinity for it. So tell me more about that a little bit. You know, briefly.
Yeah, I'm taking it for some co-infections for some tick illnesses. So I learned about it from Stephen Buhner, and I'm taking the glycerin tincture, which I got from Woodland Essence. I have no affiliation, but they might be helpful for Barbara because they have a lot of glycerin herbs.
Could be, yeah.
But I felt just really called from reading the book, and I tried it, and it's really helping me.
Super, yeah. Yeah, so let's put this in context. So do you want to know more about that for what's going on with you now, or are you also wanting more information about maybe coronavirus with it, or just in general, or what do you think? How can I help answer your concerns or questions?
Well, I thought about mentioning it since Isatis is supposed to be very good with a lot of viral. I heard that it has a lot of antiviral properties, so I thought maybe just mentioning it in general. But again, like my background knowledge about those two isn't very big, so I was just wondering in general if you had any information on them.
Well, you did mention one of my favorite herbalists, and I really do like Stephen Buhner, and he's worth looking into. He's got a couple books, one that's on antiviral herbs and another one that's on antibiotic herbs. So Buhner is spelled Buhner. So you can order his book and kind of do your own research, and you know, like this wonderful person did, and find out for yourself if there's some herbs in there that are right for you. Honestly, I've grown woad or Isatis because I have a kind of a Celtic affinity, and I like the color blue, and it's sometimes called the poor person's indigo because it makes considered to be an inferior blue color with a dye. But the Celts would cover their bodies with it and go into battle. And for me, it's a really cool herb just for that affinity reason. And that's all, you know, superficial to what you're taking it for, which is an internal aid. And I'm aware of its use as an immune stimulant, but honestly, I don't have direct experience with it, so I can't speak from it from a personal clinical experience. There is another herb that I have a little bit more experience with that's similar, called Baptisia, which I started mentioning before I disappeared, and that's Baptisia, and I've grown that before and used it, and that is another probably short-term herb that you can take that's an immune stimulant, immune modulator. You have to be really careful about how you use it because it does some really curious things with the cellular activity, I guess you could say, of our immune system, but it might be another one to have in your tool chest, you know, to kind of rotate in and out and see how you feel about it. And if you're sensitive, like, tell me your name again, I'm sorry. Ava?
Yeah, Ava.
Ava, yeah. If you're sensitive enough, you can clue into these herbs and you can realize, oh yeah, this is probably when I should stop taking it because I just don't feel right. Or you might have an overt symptom show up that says, this is time to get off this herb and try something else. How long have you used Isatis for? Is it just something you take regularly?
I started taking it on March 8th.
Oh, okay. So you're still kind of, it's a new herb for you and you're working with it, but it feels good, right?
Yeah, it's decreased a lot of like heart symptoms, I guess, from the infections, which was really big for me.
Interesting. Interesting, interesting. Well, I'll be curious to see how long do you think you're going to stay on it? Do you know?
I'm pretty in tune, and my body's very clear when it doesn't want it, and I'm kind of surprised it wants it this long, but we'll see.
Okay, good. Well, so there you go. You're going to regulate it yourself, so you're all good. So that's the thing with a lot of these immune type herbs is because they're not tonic herbs, like I talked about in the other lecture, that are adaptogenic, and you can take them long period of time because they're really more nutritive in what they do. These herbs that are kind of drifting into the drug side, you have to be really judicious about how you use them because they really do change the way your body does stuff, and that can be good for short term, but long term it can cause, let's just call it a state of rebellion in your body. So you just want to be really clear about that, and please do your research. If you're already taking something, these types of herbs can really interact and could cause all sorts of strange stuff to show up on tests and make your doctor go, what is the problem here? So you want to be honest with your doctor and say, look, I'm taking your stuff, but I'm also doing this crazy herb stuff. So you know what I mean? So.
Lawrence, I know we're not pitching you, but I'm going to pitch you. You do take private clients, correct?
I do, and the way that works is you have to contact me and you have to fill out an intake form. The FDA doesn't allow me just to sell you stuff, but if you're interested in, you have the time to fill out my form. Maybe it takes a half an hour tops. I'm happy to send that to you, and then you can become one of my private clients. So.
Okay.
I'm
So
Carla
again-
Meske with SpiritHealer.com. Thank you for watching our pop-up videos with Lawrence on herbs. We look forward to seeing you in Circle. Join our list at SpiritHealer.com/join. And you can join our circles and take classes and even request a healing from me for you or for your animal friends. See you soon.